Hello, I'm Renaud Charpentier. I'm the game director on Empire of the Ants.
So what kind of game is Empire of the Ants?
At its core, it's a RTS, real-time strategy. And by strategy, it means long-term choice. So it's not a game that is a Twitch game where you're going to micromanage units all the time very quickly. It's a game where you have to choose how you plan your economy ahead, how you build your units, and how you use them in combat. Managing your economy basically linked to the territory you control. So a bit like a game like Company of Heroes, the more territory you control, the more nest you control, the more nest you have, the more economy you have, and the more units you are capable of controlling. So if you start losing a region and you start losing territory, it actually directly affects your military and your economy, and that works in both ways. When you capture territory from an enemy, you actually reduce its economic and its military power. The fights themselves let you time to adjust, and there is a very important mechanism that if you have two units that engage in close combat, as they are insects and they are very disciplined, they are never going to break ranks. They are going to fight to the death, which means that if a unit of your gunners have been engaged by enemy warriors, you shouldn't leave them there, but you can't just order them to retreat. They won't do it. So you have to engage a warrior with another of your unit to be able to basically send your unit back and save them. So it means that you have to watch how the combats are going and taking what I would call a really tactical decision during the combat. And you have the time to do that because these units are literally hundreds of units, so they're not going to kill each other in 10 seconds. You have the time to see, okay, what's the situation, who should I retreat, who should I save, and also, as you are an ant, you are capable of using pheromones. And pheromones basically allows you to boost, protect, defend, or influence the other unit. You even have fear pheromones that allows you to make the other unit flee for some time in terror, not really understanding why they are fleeing, but they are insects. The pheromone told them, oh, it's very dangerous, so you can fake that, and it can give you time to precisely adjust the combat and potentially win it.
So very similar to the hero mechanic in old RTS games.
Yes, absolutely. You could compare that to the powers you had on the heroes in a Warcraft 3. That's quite similar, effectively.
I do want to talk more about the mechanics. Before I get to the mechanics, I want to talk about the visuals in your game. It not only looks gorgeous, but you have hundreds of models on screen. How are you able to achieve that?
So we don't really have hundreds of units. We have thousands of units.
Oh, excuse me, sorry.
No, I mean, literally, to be honest, the game is scaled so that in the biggest scene we have 15,000 agents that are active at the same time. 15,000, that's the limit. And a PlayStation 5, which is our kind of target for frame rate, we managed to have that in 30 FPS stable. Well, we built the simulation with quite a lot of tricks to be able to do that, but we obviously rely on Unreal 5. We wouldn't have been able to do that without the latest tech that they have, using nanite and things like that. And also some tricks like the unit you see use basically are not skinned mesh. That would be way too slow to compute. So they are actually mesh that are pre-calculated. The animation are pre-calculated and rendered as just changing the shape of the mesh, which is way faster, a bit less easy to transition, but you can manage to do it going through a neutral pose, etc. And that's the way we managed to have all of these units in a decent frame rate.
This is also based on a series of novels. Can you talk about how you worked with the novelist?
We worked directly with the author, Bernard Werber, who was present all through the game, and even when we had the first playable demo, he looked at it and gave feedback. The idea, if your hero, which is 103 stops, and you'll see that he's actually getting on his feet and cleaning his antenna. That was an idea that came from him, and we're like, yeah, great idea, let's do that. So we work in tandem with him. That's a trilogy of book, and we are treating the story of the first one. So it's quite, and then we are directly following the story from its very beginning to the end of the first tome.
So not only is there online PvP, but there's also like a narrative campaign.
Yes, that's really how it's structured. We try to make sure that the narrative campaign, we have hubs where you have several missions and maps you can do in each hub, but you're not forced to do them all to progress. So one thing we made sure of is that you're not forced to complete 100% of a mission to be able to finish the game. So if there is that mission that you don't really get, or this one you don't think is really interesting, well, you can just do the others and continue and not be blocked by something linear. So I think it's a structure quite a few players will appreciate, and that's the objective, to tell a story through the campaign. And then we have a rather solid multiplayer mode, 1-1, free FFA. You can create your own games with a code, play with your friend, and that's really human versus human, and as brutal as it will be, and it is.
Why do you think RTSs have been so rare over the last decade?
That's a very good question. I was a big fan of it, or I wouldn't do that. Maybe one of the things that happened is that at some point maybe they became too elitist. I mean, at least they became a bit too elitist for me. I was a huge Warcraft 3 player. StarCraft 2 was, I would say, too fast and too much of a Twitch game and an action game for me.
There's a lot to manage in that game, yeah.
A lot to manage. So the best player had to have 300 APM and manage each of the unit very quickly. And I mean, I get it can be very interesting and some people like it, but to me you are going in the direction of an action game, basically, where micro decisions are super important. And to me, RTS, real-time strategy, should be about longer-term decision. So you have some strategy, some tactics, but not really action decision. And also, that's exactly what doesn't work on the controller, and probably the reason you have very few of this genre of game that actually worked well on console, because maybe with a keyboard and a mouse you can do your 300 APM with a controller. It's not really meant for that. So the idea was to go back a bit more to the root of strategy game, where you have time to decide and you win or lose thanks to your decision, not your ability to execute those decisions. So that was the idea with this game.
So talk about like how you mapped the controls for the UI for an RTS on a controller, which felt really good. Like, what were some of the biggest challenges when doing that?
I would say that was the key mission, and we did that from the start. It's like, for me, that was the biggest constraint, not a constraint, but objective. It has to feel natural and be good on a controller. If that additional feature, that additional microcontrol on the unit, etc., doesn't fit there, then it shouldn't be there. And that's what guided the way of doing it. We worked on how to control each unit individually, make group of units. For example, you can make groups of units, but you can make 3 groups. You could say, okay, yeah, only 3 groups. Maybe some RTS you can do an infinite number of groups. I don't know you, but I've never made more than a couple of groups in an RTS. I've never played an RTS where I had 7 active groups at the same time. That's very rare that you need that, and it's very confusing. So we found a way to do unit groups that we think is pretty intuitive, works well, with a limit of, okay, you'll only be able to manage 3 groups. Is it enough? Playing multiplayer with it? Yes, absolutely enough. You never wish that you would have 5 groups, because in total, you'll be able to control 7 legions. So 7 legions split in 3 groups is way enough to have control over them. You don't need a 4th one. And so that was always this idea of the controller must disappear. You must forget after, let's say, a couple of hours that you have a controller in hand, and everything must feel intuitive with it. And if it's not the case, and we played hundreds of games, and something, maybe a little bit something like, yeah, it's a bit richer, but I'm always kind of looking at my hand, etc. No, get rid of it. It has to be fluid on a controller. And that was the motto for deciding how you control the units. For example, you do not have individual powers on the unit, so each unit doesn't have power you can activate. We could have done that. Never find a way to make it intuitive and easy to use. Instead, we move the power through pheromones on the main hero and on the cross, basically, and that is very intuitive and works very well and gives enough strength to enough, I would say, richness to the game, instead of trying to cram in the fact that each unit has activable power and then you struggle to activate them. No, don't do that. Keep the control fluid. It's a game where you should think to win and not actually be faster and managing a very complex binding.
I feel like having multiple groups leads into what you said before, with like you wanted to have several groups because one group was just this unit that did X ability that you had to spam in a fight. When like if they just all attack and they just engage, you don't need that level of complexity.
Yeah, one thing we did, which fits very well with the subject matter, is that your units are actually insects. So you don't only control ants, you control bugs, and you have flying units, etc. But they are all insects, so they are very obedient. If you tell them to stay here and guard that point, they are not going to decide to attack, etc. So it means you can even let an enemy pass next to them, and very obediently not attack him. So you have to manage them. On the other hand, they're never going to make the game fuzzy because they take decisions that you didn't ask them to do. So you are in control of it, and you are kind of Napoleon or Caesar on the top of his hill, given orders to his unit to actually attack that flank, detach from these ones, etc. So that's a bit the feeling you have when you play. And one of the things we do in terms of level design especially is that you always have those stones or rocks, etc., where you can quickly climb up, like Napoleon on top of his hill, to actually see the situation and order your warriors to go to the south and those guys to retreat, etc. And that's really this decision that will make the difference.
What kind of enemies will we be facing in the narrative campaign?
So in the narrative campaign, I don't want to spoil everything, but you're going to encounter what in this universe is the classical enemy of our ants, which are the termites, but which are kind of weaker enemy. And later you'll have skirmish with another race of ants, which are usually called carpenter ants or black ants, deep ants, which are kind of a bit bigger and more aggressive than you are. So they become a tougher enemy. And like in the book, I don't want to spoil it, you might have a kind of civil war, which means you'll be pitted against other red ants.
There's a grasp for power in the ant kingdom.
It's brutal. I mean the novel and the story is all about that. That was the great idea of the book, of actually taking the camera and showing us that to find empires that are fighting each other with queens that are having political strife and manipulation and wars, etc. You didn't need to go on Mars. You just needed to look at your feet and have this empire that is just there, has always been there, kind of ignores us, but is quite complex and very civilized and looks a lot like it looks a bit like the Roman Empire actually.
Very, very historically driven, yeah.
Yeah, and it's the funny thing is we are quite respectful of the entomology of what the insects actually do, and and the more we dug into it, the more we are surprised by the complexity of their societies. We didn't have to invent many things. The fact that they use pheromones to synchronize themselves, the fact that they have different types of units with different roles. It's not something we created for RTS, it's just like that.
Oh yeah, the gunner unit is that ant that actually sprays acid.
Yeah,
so
exactly. and that I use to actually kill things that we wouldn't be able to kill physically because the acid is going to attack the kitten, etc., etc. So we're like, okay, we don't have to invent much to have the tools we need to do. And they also effectively steal things from the other ants. They can to actually steal eggs, which is basically stealing slaves to work for them. So you don't really have to add much to the natural reality to have a quite brutal setup that is perfect for a strategy game.
How long did this game stay in development for?
When we release it, we'll have been working on it for about 3 years globally.
It was beautiful for 3 years.
Well, thank you. We're lucky that the subject we treat, so basically having micro detail on those elements, fits well with the technology that Epic developed for the Unreal 5 engine, being able to use things like assets coming from Quixel, photogrammetry. So some of the assets in the game we actually captured ourselves in the forest where the book takes place, near Paris. So we went there with equipment and actually kind of scanned rocks and plants and etc. to put them straight into the game. So it's pretty exactly if you go there. We try to do a couple of maps where the people who know the place near Paris might recognize where it takes place actually. That would be fun.
Now, like speaking to that, like, is it easier when you're doing ants and shrubs that exist in the real world as opposed to something like super stylized or like super out there creatively? Like, does it make your job, I don't want to say easier, does it make it more streamlined, I guess?
It's both a boon because your concept art is already there.
Yeah.
And it's quite incredible concept art. I mean, every time you looked at those insects, enemies, you've seen what we call the gendarme, the red bugs, no firebugs maybe for you. Anyway, so when you look at them closely and start modeling them, they look like Geiger's monsters. They are fantastic. They are full of details, full of interesting materials. We don't have to invent more. They're just there. So that's in a sense a boon. The other thing is that you kind of have a constraint to try to keep all of that believable. So there are some stuff like, okay, we want the nest to be defended, so we need some barrier that the ant would create to defend them. In a real life, they don't really do that for some reason. So you have to find some time. Okay, so we are going to use this realistic branch of wood and put them around to signify that they have created defenses, etc. So it's a boon because all of the, I would say, the art direction is coherent because it's just what it is, this micro world, so we don't have to invent it. And the difficulty is that sometimes you want, for gameplay reason, to represent something that you need for your logic, and you have to manage to make that fit in there, and that it's still quite natural, and you don't break that equilibrium. So that's the challenge graphically. Yeah.
What was the biggest challenge you, either creatively or from a technological standpoint, to achieve your vision?
On this one, honestly, the tech and the art went really well. I mean, we're still working on it. We hope to have something that everyone will enjoy. No, seriously, the big challenge was the game system, as we talked at the beginning. So really having a rich tactical and strategical game on a controller that works really well, that is readable, and that feels natural playing it that way. That was quite novel because we didn't really have a model for that, and so we had to experiment quite a lot. And I would say that's the thing that took us the longest time to hammer out and have the right version where we are happy with it. The graphics came together quite quickly, and the tech evolved, but optimization of the tech, we started it from the start. We knew that displaying like 15,000 agents at the same time would be a challenge, so the engineer actually created simulation system that were capable of handling that from the start. But the core gameplay, yeah, that's probably what took us a year and a half to have something we were happy with, and now we are pretty happy with the result, but we are still playing it, polishing it, balancing it. That's
balance is a big one in RTS too, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you know, in RTS, we are even going to keep looking at how player plays after release, especially multiplayer, and we already plan to look at what units are used and basically tweak the meta and see how people play and eventually patch it and evolve it, probably add maps, etc., etc. So I've listened to the community, see how that's going to be very interesting for us because I think it's quite fresh as a game, as a proposition. So surely the feedback from it are going to be a bit unexpected for us. We don't really know what. I mean, if you do a very realistic racing game these days, you have communities that have plenty of excellent realistic racing games, so you kind of know a bit what they want, what they are looking at, how they react. For a game like that, which is a bit of a fresh proposal, we are going to be eager to see, okay, how did people got it? What worked, what didn't work? Because when you work for it on a long time, it's hard for you to be objective about that. You try, but it's difficult. And so we are really eager to see how different types of players react to it, react to the campaign, and how they like its structure and its balance, and also, of course, through looking at metrics and how people play, how players are going to react to the PvP, the human versus human fight, which are pretty brutal so far and fun, but that's something we will adapt to and evolve even after release. That's the plan, yeah.
So when does the game come out? What platform is it aiming for at launch?
So it's releasing this November, and it's coming on all platforms, so PlayStation 5, Xbox, PC through Steam, Epic, GOG, I think, all platforms at the same time. And the multiplayer is cross-platform, so whatever version, whatever platform your friend have, you'll be able to play against him or with him.
Does that include Nintendo Switch also?
That the Switch itself, no, you won't.
That's
a valid question. We thought about it 3 years ago, and we made with Microids the wise decision not to try to emulate these graphics on a Switch 1. We are obviously thinking about Switch 2, but that's the future. That would be for next year.
Perfect.